You guys tell me when when everybody's rolling and ready to rock. Everybody have their phones off? Phones, not off, but just on your ringer. Right. But take as many pictures as you want. Hashtag Whydah.
Folks, this is the Cape
all about
Cod
marketing.
Times. We're here at the Whydah Pirate Museum, where officials
Okay.
will be discussing an
All right,
interesting
are we ready to go?
discovery.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today at the Whydah Pirate Museum on Cape Cod. My name, if you don't know me, I'm Casey Sherman, author of The Finest Hours and project leader for the Whydah investigative team. Before we begin this morning, I'd just like to acknowledge the members of the team that we have assembled here. They're going to be addressing you momentarily as well. We have renowned explorer and founder of the Whydah Pirate Museum and the ship itself, Mr. Barry Clifford, right here. We have members of Barry's team, his archaeological team, Chris McCourt, who you've met. He's on his back right now. He will be available for comment afterwards. He is a field archaeologist and director of exhibits here at the Whydah Museum. We have also Maria Zahn. She is an archaeologist who has worked with Barry and his team for quite some time, discovering new things that this shipwreck has been giving us since 1717. Also joining us from the University of New Haven, Professor Timothy Palmbach, Chair of Forensic Science at the Henry Lee College of Criminal Justice and Forensic Science at the University of New Haven, and his esteemed colleagues, Dr. Claire Glynn and Dr. David San Pietro. So today we're really here to try to solve a mystery that is 300 years in the making. In April 1717, the Whydah Galley, a pirate ship weighed down with the combined treasure of 54 ships, wrecked right off the coast of Cape Cod. Now, I grew up here on Cape Cod, and as a child of the 1970s, I understood the mythology and the lore and the legend of this legendary pirate and this legendary ship that went down somewhere off Cape Cod. My grandfather had told me story after story about it. But what I didn't know was that there was a man who wanted to prove fact as opposed to fiction, who wanted to take mythology and make it real. Barry Clifford also had heard incredible stories growing up from his relatives about this pirate and about this pirate ship, and really made it his life's mission to find this ship. And with a cast of characters almost similar to the pirates that went down in 1717, Barry and his crew, which included at the time John F. Kennedy Jr., who was Barry's first mate. In 1984, they discovered the Whydah pirate wreck. It's the only authenticated pirate ship that has ever been recovered anywhere in North America. And Forbes magazine, just a few years ago, had designated the pirate captain himself, Black Sam Bellamy, as the richest pirate who ever lived. In 1717, as I said, he had seized 54 ships in 1 year. And they took the collective cargo, the collective treasure, put it on this Whydah ship, which then went down. Now, comparatively speaking, he is much more successful than Blackbeard, whom he sailed with, Captain Morgan, whom he sailed with. He was called the Pirate Prince, not just because of his success as a pirate, but because he was a benevolent captain. He, instead of killing the people that he raided and took over their ships, he allowed them to join his crew or allowed them to sail away safely. So that is Barry Clifford's little introduction that I gave today. He's going to speak about this momentarily, but you guys are here to witness history today. We're going to be doing incredible things through the DNA process, which the DNA team will speak to momentarily, but I want to bring up the man himself, Mr. Barry Clifford. Barry.
Thank you, Captain. It's a pleasure to have you all here. Thank my crew who've been working tirelessly on this. We really have, the Whyddahs, as you said, they were on 54 ships. But one of the things that people didn't realize about the Whydah There were 180 pirates on board the ship, a third of whom were of African origin, most of whom were former slaves. And that hadn't really come to light until after we discovered the ship and after we started learning more about who these people really were in the golden age of piracy. So as we continued to excavate the ship, as we continued to do more research, our late beloved historian, I can't say his name without... Okay, so anyway, we came up that a third of the Whydah crew were of African origin. Also, many Native Americans on board the ship. And on board the ship that had a license to carry people to be sold at auction, slaves, they were experimenting in democracy. After they captured the Whydah ship, freed the slaves, it's known that many, many Africans during this golden age of piracy, in fact, about a third of all the pirates were of African origin. And on board the Whydah, these people, former slaves, brutalized merchant sailors, were experimenting in democracy. And many Africans during the period of golden age of piracy were being elected as officers and even captains on board ships. And this is one of the things, probably the most important thing that has come to me from this shipwreck, is discovering this part of history. And when we first began to do this, no, that's not the Whydah. I have a good friend from the Smithsonian who was always, no, that's not it. I'm not going to mention his name. But then we found the Whydah Bell in '84, the Whydah Galley. And there was a lot of crow eating that night on the Cape because nobody believed that we had actually found the ship. They actually had a nice soft room for me where I wasn't going to hurt myself all made of rubber. We're going to put this guy away. But anyway, we've been doing this since '84. We have a great team. And who is this pirate? Who is this lost pirate? Is he Sam Bellamy? Is he African? Is he from Scotland, Ireland, England? Native American? We don't know yet. But we have many lifetimes of work ahead of us. We have over 200 concretions. One of them is six times bigger than this. It has 7 cannons all stuck together with bones and coins sticking out of the side of it. And underneath that, Chris McCourt and my son Brandon, back in 2007, we went down deeper than we ever went before because normally we find artifacts about 10 feet under the sand. We went down 20 feet and we found this whole new layer of artifacts. The Whydah was only supposed to have 22 cannons or 24 cannon. We found 60. And one big lump, which we call the cannon pile, all of these cannons are stuck together. And that's where we're going this summer. Now, underneath that cannon pile, which we brought up, it's at our laboratory in Brewster. It'll be back here at our science center one of these days, and we'll be taking that apart. But underneath that, we have reason to believe where this possibly could be where the mother lode from the ship is. And again, we've never sold coins. We don't sell treasure. We keep all of our collection together for museum purposes. But as Casey was saying, 54 ships were robbed. And we know from the Whydah, according to primary source documents, this is not me, 50 pounds was added to every man's share, there being 180 men on deck. This was from Captain Southhack. 50 pounds, this was from one of the pirates who was tried in Boston. And he was basically pleading for his life. He was hanged. He wasn't bragging to the judge, but he said 50 pounds was added to every man's share, there being 180 men on deck. That's 4.5 tons of coins. Was added to every man's share because that was taken from the Whydah, which was the 50th ship. The 52nd and 53rd ship, according to the colonial papers of July 1717, had 400,000 8/8. That's 400,000 1-ounce coins that the Whydah pirates captured. So, will we find it? We've already brought up like 20,000 coins, but I've got another couple of lifetimes worth of that. Anyway, thank you very much for coming here. Thank you.
What the Whydah wreck really represents here in America, it's America's version of King Tut's tomb. the treasures that this shipwreck has revealed since 1984, since Barry Clifford discovered the wreck, has been enormous. And as Barry just pointed out, the motherlode of treasure still has yet to be found. So in 2017, 300 years after the Whydah wrecked off of Cape Cod, Barry and his team uncovered something else. They uncovered human remains, which is in the concretion that we're going to be showing you very shortly. And Barry and I had a conversation at that point. As Barry said, who is this pirate? We know it's a pirate from the Whydah galley, but whose remains do they belong to? Could these remains be Captain Sam Bellamy himself? Now, why we believe that these remains are that of Captain Sam Bellamy is because of where the remains were found, where the bones were found. They were found very closely to where Barry and his team uncovered Captain Bellamy's pistol, which is a very ornate instrument that is on display here in the museum. You'll be able to take photography of that afterwards. And it was wrapped in a silk sash that we believe was the captain's himself. So then it became a question of, okay, if we think it might be Sam Bellamy, well, how do we do it? How do we test for DNA? And we knew that Captain Bellamy was a young man when he traveled from England to the New World to become a pirate. So he didn't have any children. But Bellamy was one of 6 children back in his hometown of Devon, England. So what we did after that is I began to reach out to all of the parish churches in that general area as to where Bellamy was born and raised. And over time, we were able to identify Sam Bellamy's bloodline descendant from his paternal line. So one of Sam Bellamy's brothers, great-great-great-great-grandsons, I believe, or nephews, still exists today, and he is more than happy to share his DNA sample with this crew. I don't know if he thinks he's going to get some of this treasure, Barry, but he wants to do this for history. This is a very historic moment, not just in Cape Cod history, but in United States history. As I said, this is the only authenticated pirate ship that's ever been recovered here in North America. And to move that history forward into new technology, into science, I reached out to my good friend here, Professor Tim Palmbeck from the University of New Haven, Connecticut. Now, Tim is not a stranger to Cape Cod. Tim and I worked together in 2000 when Tim was part of a team that came to Cape Cod to work on the Boston Strangler case. My Aunt Mary Sullivan was the last victim of the Boston Strangler case, and Tim's crew exhumed her remains for DNA testing. So I got in touch with Tim and his esteemed team, and I had to just say 2 words, pirate and bone. And that immediately triggered his imagination, and he got excited about it, and that's what brought Professor Palmbeck here today. So I'll let him take it from here. Thanks, Tim.
Barry and Casey, thank you so much. This is indeed a privilege and an honor for us to be part of this. All you had to do is say hello, it's Casey, and I would have said yes. I have a great deal of respect for him as an individual as well as a reporter. In addition to that, this does sound like an amazingly challenging, interesting forensic case, and we'll explain to you a little bit why that's so and why we think it's so important for us to get involved in that. What I didn't know is the history about this. And besides the fact that I am a science geek, I adore history, and part of the early culture, particularly as it relates to the African trade, phenomenal. That alone would run me here. And I commend you for continuing to do history.
Thank you so much.
Our hope is that we can resolve this problem for you today, but not today. It's going to take some time. We explained that. I know you've been waiting a long time for these results, but let me just add to this that had they called us even a few years ago, it would not have had the semblance of hope we maybe have now. DNA technology has been around not that long in the world of sciences. The late 80s is really when it came to being. But over the last 10 years, we've really upped the ante and had some new technologies that are going to give us a shot at doing something like this. Coming out of the gate that this is not going to be easy. We have difficulty sometimes getting DNA profiles from victims that are a week or a month old if they're in adverse conditions. So to go 300 years below the sea is a challenge. But through the preservation methodology that they've undertaken here, we have some pretty good hopes. I'm going to quickly pass it along to my colleagues. We're going to first let Dr. Claire Glynn come up and explain to you the complexity of extracting the DNA so that we can do a viable analysis. And then finally, Dr. David Sanpietro will talk about the options that we think we could face. There's a variety of tools and methodologies we can use. We're going to have to kind of be willing to use what the evidence will lead us to as we go. So, with that in mind, and then any question you have, we'll jump in for you. Dr. Glynn.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for having me here today. So, as Professor Prombach suggested, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're going to extract out the DNA from the bone. This really is an exciting opportunity for us. It's not every day that we get to work on a case that's over 300 years old. So using science to bring history alive really is a wonderful opportunity that we have here in front of us. Now, as Professor Prombach said, getting DNA from bones and from fresh remains presents its own challenges at first with getting DNA from the actual bone. The DNA isn't simply sitting on the surface of the bone. We can't just swab it off like you might see on some of the TV shows. We have to really sand down the outer surface. We have to remove any sort of surface contaminants from it. And as it's been at the bottom of the ocean for 300 years, there's going to be a lot of contaminants sitting there. Then we want to remove any sort of exogenous or external DNA that might have gotten onto our sample simply from the collection and preservation purpose, and from us transporting it back to our own sterile lab conditions back at the University of New Haven. Now, getting DNA, as I mentioned, from bones is not always the easiest thing. It is very, very possible, though. It does have some challenges because we need to dig down into the inner surface of the bone, and we need to break it open. With ancient DNA, we face even further challenges with getting any sort of good quality and some good quantity of DNA from that bone. It's the quality and quantity that we're most concerned about getting here. Now, the fact that it was submerged in this concretion for so long might actually be a benefit to us because it hasn't allowed any sort of air getting in there, allowing the degradation of that DNA. But the DNA that we find might be in various stages of degradation, and it might be of a very low quantity. The low quantity isn't too much of a concern because the advancements in the technologies that we've had, especially within the last 5 to 10 years, means that we can work with a low amount. It's more so the quality of what we have. We don't want that heavily degraded DNA because that can be quite problematic for us. So we'll begin by sanding down the bone, washing it several times with various wash solutions to remove all that surface contamination. Then we'll use a Dremel tool to dig down into the epiphyses of the bone. We believe we have a femur. Once we get it out fully, we'll know better. But that's the rounded end of the long bone that we want to target. So using a Dremel, we'll dig down and get essentially a chunk, like coring an apple, and getting a chunk out from the center, removing the upper layer just to remove any further surface contamination and any surface exogenous DNA. And then we can try and extract it. Now, typical methods for extracting the DNA from bone would be to essentially pulverize it, to smash it to pieces, to break open the inner surface of it. We have a cryogenic laboratory mill that we'll use for this purpose. We'll cryogenically preserve the sample, preserving the structure of the cellular content in there. This will grind it down into a very, very fine powder, breaking it up, opening up the surface area for us. There's alternative methods, though, that have recently been released. Just one this year, a new method, the T-Bone X kit from Tokyo, says that you don't need to do that they can do this they can get the DNA out of bone just by using this kit. So we might try a variety of different options. Then we can use some of our newer commercialized kits, such as the QIAGEN DNA Investigator extraction kit, that will pull it onto a spin column for us and capture the DNA on it. Then we'll be able to measure its quality and its quantity. And once we have a working quality and quantity, we'll move on to our actual DNA analysis, which I'll pass you on to Dr. David Sanpietro to talk about.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, thank you for allowing us the opportunity to work on something like this. It really is very intriguing to be part of a process such as this. As Dr. Glynn just alluded to, a large part of our success is probably going to be determined on whether or not we can actually isolate any usable DNA material from these samples. Once that happens, fingers crossed, optimistic, what we will do downstream is then use certain assays to see if we can actually associate it with, say, a family member. And as was mentioned earlier, the fact that there is a living male descendant from our pirate. It provides us an opportunity to actually perhaps look at that DNA information from the remains here to this living descendant. This is primarily because what we're looking at is something called lineage markers. Lineage markers tend to be those things that are passed the same way down from generation to generation, more or less. An example of this is one that's known as YSTRs. And YSTRs have been used for this kind of purpose in some other very famous historical cases. If you refer back to Thomas Jefferson, Sally Hemings affair, things of that nature, they used YSTR analysis to come to some sort of resolution of that particular issue. This particular marker is passed down through the male cell line over generations. Simply put, you have the same YSTR profile, if you're a male, as your father does, as your grandfather on your father's side, as your uncles on your father's side, and you would pass that on to your male offspring as well. Again, hopefully this is something that we can actually isolate, and via a process known as the polymerase chain reaction, or PCR as it's commonly referred to, we'll be able to take these small amounts, as Dr. Glynn alluded to, and hopefully be able to what we call amplify them up or copy them up to give us enough material to work with and run the assay that I've just described. Depending upon what's there, depending upon the quality and the amount of DNA that's isolated, will in some ways dictate which way we do end up going. There might be other things we might have to consider in terms of possibly another lineage marker called mitochondrial DNA testing. Well, that would depend upon finding descendants who are associated with the maternal line. So again, at this point, we know there is a male descendant, so hopefully this is the path that we'll be able to kind of follow up and pursue with those downstream techniques. And plus, we may have a couple of other tricks up our sleeve in terms of how we go about trying to deal with these samples when we get to that stage to try to maximize the amount of information that we could hopefully get from these items. So,
You have a time frame of how long this could all take?
I think time frame, as far as I do think the hardest part is going to be probably the extraction part. So I think we're looking at, hopefully we have a month window to kind of at least get to that point, because that will be the tell-all. If we get to that point and say Dr. Glynn isolates a decent amount, fortunately our technology today is so sensitive where even if it's not a bumper crop of DNA, so to speak, hopefully there'll be material there that we can work with. So we're looking at a month to try to optimize our extraction possibilities.
In the event you're able to extract DNA, but it's not Bellamy, is there any way to determine who it could be, what to find descendants from that?
Sure. Well, we do know that Bellamy is one of 40 pirates that went down with the ship. Now, ultimately, what is our goal? That's a great question, Walt. The goal is, if it's Bellamy, it's time to bring Bellamy home. Bellamy has spent 300 years at sea, and what we would ultimately do if it is Black Sam Bellamy is to bring his remains home to England for burial. If it is not Bellamy, it's still one of the Whydah pirates. Now, one of the most interesting things about this journey, it's a journey that Barry and his team are undertaking every day. There are still more answers to this mystery that have yet to reveal themselves. People really don't realize that somewhere on Cape Cod in the Wellfleet area is the largest burial ground of pirate remains anywhere in North America. 100 pirates that were washed ashore after the wreck are all buried somewhere within that area between the elbow of Chatham and the fist of Provincetown. It's one of our ultimate goals is to find that particular burial ground and, as I said, bring these remains home for burial.
Could I ask a question? Yeah, gentlemen, just a question for you, actually, I think you'll find interesting. This is all buried in a deep anaerobic environment. When we work on shipwrecks that are buried in the mud, oftentimes you could, excuse me for saying, in Captain Kidd's ship in Madagascar, when we get down into the deep mud, you could actually smell the urine that had soaked into the wood. We know that there's a lot of odor associated with this, and a lot of the material around the bone is very fleshy, and the fact that it's in this deep anaerobic environment and hasn't dried out, will that help with the DNA process?
Let Dr. Flynn take it.
It can, but we don't know until we crack it open to
Okay.
see. We really can't. I mean, the ammonia smells could be as a result of something else.
Right here, Claire?
Sorry about that. The smells that you're getting can be a mixture of different things. They could be ammonia, that are produced as a result, not as a result of urine.
But if it were out in the dry atmosphere, it wouldn't have any smell
No,
because
it would
everything
be
would
gone.
dried up.
You
But
just
when you're
leave it
down
out
deep
there.
like this,
Yeah.
everything stays, and the gas,
It's very
as it
possible.
decomposes, the gas gets trapped in
Yeah.
this bubble, and then it breaks, and then you can smell it underwater.
And there was reports similar to that from a shipwreck off the coast of Greece that was much older than this case as well, that they were able to recover some.
But that's what they
remains.
use cadaver dogs for on the edge of lakes, because dogs can smell the oxygen coming up through the water,
Yeah.
and that will lead them to the bodies that have gone into the lake. Anyway, that's my own experience.
Any other questions before we get to the
Let me
show
just
and
add
tell?
one thing really quick.
Please.
First of all, the bone that we got, if I gave Casey a wish list saying, get us the fallen bone, we'd probably get the bone you're asking for, like it's a large leg bone, so the femur. So that's really encouraging, right? You've got exactly the bone we want to do. Second of all, keep in mind this is slightly different than a criminal case. What we can definitely do is exclude Captain Bellamy from the sample if we get profile. That's easy to do, right? If that's not the case and we get a reasonable amount of the profile, but not 100%, then we have the difficult task of telling you what the probability is that it is in fact Captain Bellamy. But the good news is here, the common sense kicks in. I mean, if it's consistent with him and it's next to his gun and it's in the bottom of the ocean, common sense is going to kick in. And so it's a little bit of a different criminal case, gives us a little more latitude.
So you're saying, sorry, it's going to take a month is the most important time for you guys. When do you think we're going to have an idea of whether or not it is Bellamy or not? Is that a month as well, or?
Yes.
Well, we have to get a known sample from the living relative over in the UK, so that needs to get shipped over and that needs to be profiled as well. And we won't want to do that with just one sample of his. We'll want to try mitochondrial, we'll want to try YSTR, and a few different options. So, and the more known living relatives that we can get, the better.
So when's that test happening?
As soon as we receive it.
And this is just to get this is material that was all taken out from around the bone, and it has a very, very strong odor to it. In other words, if this were out in the dry, you wouldn't smell that; it would all have dried out. So that's this is Chris, when he called me last night, he said, "Oh my God, when they cracked that open, it hit him really." So something's preserved.
We're going to do some analysis of the concretion that was around the bone as well, and to see what sort of chemicals we can pick on the detect. It won't be for DNA analysis, but to see what's there.
Yeah.
Well, and just to add to this too, I mean, I think the fact that it was already alluded to that these conditions were anaerobic. From the DNA damage perspective, I was very okay, that's good, because if there's no oxygen getting to it in that regard, oxygen is a big proponent of damaging DNA in terms of just the processes within our bodies to begin with. So the fact that there was none, it wasn't being exposed to oxygen directly because of, I guess, its compaction underneath the surface for so long, we're cautiously optimistic that hopefully that will work hopefully in our favor.
Thank you, sir.
Barry, just real fast, can you step up? Barry, just where did you find, how deep did you find this? And again, I think you said it was within a year, and then what was your reaction? You found the cannons, this is the first time you found human remains from the ship.
Well, this has been in a tank, and like I said, we have over 200 concretions, and we keep this in our laboratory because the idea of this, number one, you need it's an extremely expensive, time-consuming process to do. And we were waiting to get a museum where we could do this because, our team, we all sat around and we had let's not take it apart. Let's wait until the public can watch us do it. That was the whole mission of why we built this museum, is so that the public could watch as we deconcrete these concretions. People can come in here and watch treasure being taken out of, you'll see them on the back, some of the concretions we have in the back, or bags that were filled with treasure. And where else in the world can you watch a pirate come to light and learn about who this person was? And that's what that's what we've decided to do here, is to do that sort of thing. And that's why it's taken so long. God knows how much, and again, we've got so much stuff that's still underneath the 20, 30 feet of sand. I'm going to be 60 by the time we're finished with this. It's a lot of work ahead of
Barry, when did you get this
Bill Shields and I were together in 1984. Bill was with us on the Whydah in 1984. WBZ.
When did this conclusion get brought up?
A few years ago, I forget the exact date. I've got
And it was about 10 feet? It was about 10 feet?
10 feet of sand, 10 to 20 feet of sand, depending on how the sand fluctuates during that year. But right now, we're down 30 feet deep. And once you get down into that deep environment, I worked on an airplane that went down in World War II, and I know we get underneath the mud. You could still smell the aquavella shave lotion on the pilot. And that's because there was no oxygen. Sorry to bring that up, but as a kid, I did that kind of work.
So on a personal level, what was it like, even searching your whole adult life, when you found out there was human remains? What was that like on a personal level to make that discovery?
It's just, it was just a great respect, and I realized we had to do this perfectly right. This is a person encapsulated with this. Who is he? Is he Irish, English, Native American, African? What's the proper thing to do? So we consulted with the state. We told them we had bones that were over 100 years old. But to me, being so closely involved with a shipwreck, this guy's like crew to us. All of us here have put our lives into this. We want to do the right thing. So that's obviously to tell his story, what they were really doing on board pirate ships. Not all pirates were good. But what slave traders? Name me one slave trader that was good. And these pirates from the Whydah were stealing money that paid for them and their families. That's the way we have to look at this when you look back in time and look at history from their perspective. These pirates were stealing money that paid for their families. So that's a different way of looking at history. It was all covered up very neatly by ethnocentric historians. But the fact is, the Whydah was a slave ship. It had a license to carry people for sale. Robbed by these horrible pirates, a third of whom were former slaves. And they were voting. God knows the king didn't like that. He would have paid George Washington just as high as Sam Bellamy. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say. Thank you very much.
Any other questions before we get to the extraction itself? Okay, we'll let you guys get ready, get set up. Poor Chris McCourt needs to... His back is about to break there. Once you get all that video, we can take you through the exhibit. You'll see Black Sam Bellamy's pistol, the sash that we talked about, and any other photography you want to get.
Thanks for sticking with us, folks. It's the Cape Cod Times. We're broadcasting live here on Facebook at the Whydah Pirate Museum. We just saw a press conference where officials are detailing efforts to try to track down whether a bone found here on the concretion in the Whydah belongs to Black Sam Bellamy, and they're going to show us an extrication here of that remains.
All right. He's holding it right now. We're going to get on the other side. Let's make sure. Are you good?
Probably not until after we take it off.
want to be able to watch it right down here. Okay, I think, okay, we can do it now, you ready?
I'm all set when you are.
Hold it, just hold it. Can you hold it for a second?
Yep, I got it.
Just out of the way. Okay, hold your right hand. Is that your left hand? Okay. Still, maybe it's a little bit right with my finger. No, I think it's just a little bit. Oh. Yep, let's try it. Yep. Move your left hand, I'll be able to see. Okay. You got the whole thing?
All right.
All right, here we'll show it around a little bit. There we go. It's actually a larger sample than we were anticipating, so this is fantastic.
That came out good. Nice job, you guys. They've been working on this for 2 months on that one.
Hundreds of hours of work.
Tell Chris, tell them how much more material is around there. What else have you been finding?
Yeah, it seems like as we're decomcreting, we're finding more and more bone, different types. We're finding some rib bone. This may be part of a breastbone here. So it looks like this guy was pretty well bagged up during the wreck because there are bones everywhere. It's almost like a jigsaw puzzle that's been all broken apart. So you can see the violence of the wreck through the positioning of the bone material. We're also getting organic material. We think we have some hair follicles, and obviously we have some leather from probably a jacket or a belt. Everything this guy had on him that's encapsulated here is going to come out and tell us more and more about this person. So it seems like every square inch of this concretion is packed with the human remains and other artifacts. There's glass here, there's iron, bone here, there's going to be coins in here, gold dust. There's even tools, there's a awl handle up here.
There's a pistol over here frozen on the side. Excuse me one second.
Yeah.
Southak was watching from the cliffs of Wellfleet, and he was watching the ship on the sandbar. And he said the next day she turned bottom up and the decks fell out. We only thought that Whydah had 24 guns on board, but we found 60. What happened here, I think, is that when the ship turned over, you have all of this heavy material that's gone to one end of the ship. That came on top of this pirate. Because all of this, he's at the bottom of this concretion, and all of this other material is on top of him. And I think that's part of the reason why he's preserved so well, is that if he were in the corner of the ship and this material fell on him, because there's a roll of lead, and that's why I think this is the bottom of the pile here. This is a roll of lead right here. And that probably, that weighs hundreds of pounds. Lead doesn't float. That's one of the, Uncle Bill told me that when I went to look for the Whydah. He said, gold don't float away. But okay. So you always find gold and lead at the bottom of the sand. The sand is like snow. You throw a penny on a snowbank in January. Where is it in May? It goes down to the road, down to the sidewalk. And that's what happens here in the sand. As the sand shifts around, all of the heavy material goes deep. So that's why we I think this material was on top of this pirate when it went down through the sand.
Is there a possibility there's a skull in there?
Yes, we x-rayed.
Folks, if you're just joining us, this is Jason from the Cape Cod Times broadcasting live. We're at the Whydah Pirate Museum, where officials just pulled a bone out of a concretion that was found on the shipwreck. It appears to be a femur, and they're hoping to do DNA tests to determine if the bone belongs to Captain Black Sam Bellamy, an infamous pirate.
It's always exciting, no matter how long you're doing something like this. Every time you make a discovery, which is every day for us while we're working here, it is exciting. It never gets mundane. I'm still shaking a little bit. It's a big deal for us.
You like your job, do you?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I do. I really do. I'm very lucky.
What we're looking at is a concretion. It's a huge piece of material pulled from the Whydah shipwreck off Cape Cod, off Wall Street, and there's all sorts of things inside, and they just pulled out a bone that they're hoping to trace back to the captain, Black Sam Bellamy, the pirate
Oh, a couple
who
hundred
hijacked the
hours.
ship.
Marie's the one that started it, and what you got, 250 hours?
I would say.
I haven't seen her too much. She's underneath here.
Yeah, smaller archaeologist, I get to sit underneath it. So I've spent just on this one side, not the.
So we're going to conclude our live broadcast here for the Cape Cod Times. You can watch the full replay, including the press conference, which details the discussion about this bone that was found on the Whydah shipwreck, and as well as the extraction of them removing it from this concretion. So stick with the Cape Cod Times Facebook page, and you can replay this video and see all of the cool action from today from the Whydah Pirate Museum. Have a great week.